In this module, we will be talking about low-intensity strategies to reduce behavior. Low-intensity strategies to reduce behavior are strategies that allow teachers to create opportunities for positive student behavior that avert problem situations before they even occur. These are essentially classroom management strategies. Classroom management consists of practices and procedures a teacher uses to maintain the environment in which instruction and learning can take place, as well as it being highly related to student success and academic achievement. Poor classroom management results in lost instructional time and decreased academic engagement. If we think about times in which we have to redirect students to engage in appropriate classroom behavior, this is taken away from your instructional time as well as that student's academic engagement because you're having to spend time on redirecting that student. Before we talk about more intensified strategies or interventions to reduce problem behavior, you always want to look at low intensity strategies first, because oftentimes the way in which a teacher interacts in their classroom can be enough to change or avert or stop inappropriate student behavior within a classroom. It's also really important to look at low intensity strategies first before higher intensity strategies, because it takes a lot of time and resources to design interventions and implement interventions. And we'll talk more about that in the future. But on with low intensity strategies. There's lots of low intensity strategies that you can include within your teaching. Here's a list of all of the ones that we're going to go through item by item as we proceed through these slides. The first low intensity strategy is called pre-corrections. Pre-corrections are very quick verbal reminders or modeling of appropriate behaviors delivered prior to the occurrence of problem behavior. You're trying to give a little prompt to the students before you anticipate the problem behavior from happening. Pre-corrections can be especially effective if you are frequently reminding students to engage in a particular behavior or disengage for a particular behavior. Say you're finding yourself reminding students that their eyes need to be at the front of the classroom while you're giving the lesson. You could say, students, remember we keep our hands to ourselves and our eyes at the front of the classroom during lessons. This is a quick little reminder to let them know, hey, I need my eyes at the front of the room before you've seen students, before you've delivered that lecture and before those students' eyes are wandering. Another example, if you're finding students that might not be very respectful to one another in a specific situation, let's say they're on their way to another classroom or you're stepping away from the classroom for a quick little minute, you can just say, please remember to be respectful and use kind words to peers. Another example would be of modeling. If you're giving some questions to your students and you want your students to raise their hand and not blurt out an answer, you could simply model raising your hand and saying, remember, raise your hand when I ask a question. Our second strategy is called active supervision. In order to prevent student misbehavior, teachers must actively supervise their students by doing several things. That is, you as a teacher moving. This is you continually moving around the classroom throughout the class period. Don't stay stationary in one place in the classroom. Instead, move your body around so you can have eyes on multiple students. Another component of active supervision is scanning, and this is where you as a teacher are continually looking around the room and throughout the classroom for the entire period. Even if you're in the back corner, you can still be scanning the room, looking for a student across the room to see if they're engaged in appropriate behavior. And the other component of active supervision is interacting. This is where you are communicating with your students, whether verbally or non-verbally, that you are aware of what's going on. Incorporating these simple active supervision strategies helps ensure students know that you as the teacher are aware of everything happening in your classroom. The next strategy is called with-itness. This is where the teacher has the ability to essentially communicate to your students in the classroom that you're aware of what's going on. It's you presenting yourself that you have control of the entire classroom. For example of this would be paying attention to those reading while simultaneously noticing and correcting a disruptive behavior in another part of the room. This can also be considered having what they consider eyes in the back of your head. Maybe you're up at the board giving a lesson, but you, with your with itness, you can understand something that's happening behind you because you've been aware of what's going on in that classroom, and you're communicating with the students, whether it's verbally or non-verbally. You can give a teacher look to a student by telling them, hey, I see what's going on, kind of cut it out, rather than having to verbally tell them to stop doing it. You can simply give a little non-verbal gesture or clue that you've been noticing what they've been doing. A non-example of with itness would be addressing a minor behavior such as talking, but letting a more serious one escape, such as someone throwing something across the room. The next strategy is called proximity. This is where you as a teacher are moving closer to a student who is engaging in inappropriate behavior. You're not saying anything to this student, rather you're just simply moving your body to get closer to that student, kind of giving them a gesture that, hey, I understand what's going on, I need you to stop that, without actually saying it. It can be very effective in a nonverbal means of prompting a student to engage in an appropriate behavior rather than a non-desired one. Say, for an example, you have a student who's chatting with their neighbor. If you simply walk over to that student by being more present in their when you're nearby, can stop them from talking rather than continuing that conversation. To use proximity, you make it very non-threatening so that it doesn't set off or escalate a negative behavior. When you're using proximity, it's important for you to know your student. Proximity can actually reinforce some students for off-task behaviors if they really desire teachers' attention. So just get to know your students, but majority of the time, proximity can curtail behavior when it's happening, with, again, non-verbally. The next strategy is called pacing. And this is where you as the teacher are moving through a lesson with appropriate momentum that facilitates student involvement. Generally, lessons that are quickly paced help students stay on task. So while you want to have a quickly paced lesson, it's also very important to understand where your students are at within the lesson. If you're moving too quickly throughout the lesson and students aren't understanding what you're doing, this is ineffective. You're going to lose students and they're not going to be engaged or involved in the lesson if you go too quickly. So quick enough, but not too quickly. The next one is called opportunities to respond. This is where you as the teacher are providing students with a high number of opportunities to answer or actively respond to academic requests. When you provide opportunities to respond, it promotes good behavior in students with even the most resistant behaviors. Several studies have found that when teachers provide enough opportunities to respond, it can increase student engagement, improve their academic outcomes, and decrease disruptive behaviors. Essentially, the mantra for how many opportunities to respond is more is best. The thing to be cautious here is that if you're providing students with questions to answer, that you're not just having one student answer and you're letting the rest of the 30 students in your classroom sit and listen. Rather, you could provide a question, have the entire class work on it in their seat together. So you say a question, what is the Pythagorean theorem? Have them at their desks by themselves answer that question on a piece of paper. Then you could have them turn to their seat partners, have a discussion about what the Pythagorean theorem is, and then finally ask the question to the entire class to answer that question. In this situation that I just provided, you have not just asked one student to provide the answer, you have asked the entire class to provide the answer, and every single student hopefully has engaged in that question and has answered it twice with themselves and with a peer. And then the last opportunity to respond would be asking for one person to share that answer. There's many ways to incorporate multiple opportunities to respond, but I challenge you as teachers to think of other ways that you can incorporate more students to answer the questions that you ask in the class rather than just asking one student and having the rest sit and listen. An opportunity to respond is where a teacher, you give a prompt, such as you ask them a question, you give them a gesture that suggests that they need to do something, you give them a statement, or you give them an academic demand. You know that a student has responded when they've given a verbal answer, a written answer, or they've demonstrated it. You can see these pictures. We have some students that are demonstrating a dance. There's lots of students in a computer lab that are answering similar questions. Or you could simply have someone verbally raise their hand and answer the question. Another low strategy would be feedback. This is where you as the teacher are informing students of what they did right or what they need to correct. Providing feedback is one of the most powerful influences of achievement. Examples that you as a teacher can give on the fly in the classroom is, Muhammad, thank you for raising your hand. Here, you have told the student that they need to raise their hands. Or another one is, Lopa, please return to your seat and walk to leave the room. Here, you have corrected the student's behavior. Instead of them running in the classroom, they need to correct that behavior and walk. This can also be done academically. Yes, you're right, 1 + 1 does equal 2 is an example of feedback. You can do this verbally or through writing if you collect homework and grade it. Feedback can be praise. A vast majority of students value teacher recognition and appreciate teacher feedback that acknowledges their hard work and compliance. Praise is a highly effective strategy for shaping student behavior and can positively affect both academic and social behavior, as found in literature. When you're giving praise, there's basic premises of using praise within your classroom. First, determine the type of praise each student responds to best. The older the students, you may find that they like it more privately rather than telling them a praise statement in the classroom. You can go closer to them and tell them. The younger they are, the more public they are. This is not always the case. It's just what is suggested. And you can also give nonverbal and verbal praise. Praise needs to be very specific. Be specific, and it needs to be delivered in response to a particular action. So after the student engages in a behavior, then you need to be specific about it and deliver it. You also need to be sincere, and it needs to be student earned. Again, this goes with the top one. The student needs to demonstrate a particular behavior in order for a praise to be given. Insincere or unearned praise is ineffective for students. And importantly, praise should be focused on effort, and process, not ability. So for example, you would say, nice work of using your math strategies to solve that problem, rather than, nice, you are so smart. Smart means ability, rather than when you talk about using strategies, you're talking about effort and process. Here are some examples of praise statements you could give. First one, excellent use of vocabulary words, Ermi. Here it's very specific. You've given the student name, you've given them praise by saying the word excellent, and you've focused on the process of them using vocabulary words. Another one is Yash, nice use of math strategies to solve that problem. Again, you have the student name, you have the effort and process of them using math strategies. Another one, class, thank you for showing dignity by concentrating and paying attention to our guest speaker. In conclusion, there are several low-intensity strategies that you as a teacher can incorporate into your daily teaching that can reduce and avert problem behavior within your classroom. Here are the strategies that we've gone over. It's important for you as a teacher to incorporate as many of these as you can into every single lesson.